Why do human women stay pregnant for 9 months? There's one thing that has happened to almost every human being who has ever lived. From today, all the way back, hundreds of thousands of years, every baby has spent about 9 months inside its mother's womb. Not 8, not 12, almost always 9. But why? Is it just a coincidence? Or was the human body somehow designed this way? Or is it the result of a biological rule that existed long before the first civilization? Or is 9 months the price our entire species has had to pay just to be born? Ancient civilizations had many different answers. Some believed pregnancy was a gift from the gods. Others believed a soul needed a specific number of days before entering a human body. Some even saw pregnancy itself as a curse. But here's what's truly surprising. Modern science has uncovered something far stranger than any ancient myth. Today's video isn't about why women become pregnant. It's about why humans have to stay pregnant for almost exactly 9 months. Because if pregnancy were just a few weeks shorter, our species might never have survived. And if it lasted just a few weeks longer, millions of mothers would never survive childbirth. So, who, or rather, what, created this extraordinary balance? Most people assume that human babies stay in the womb for 9 months, simply because that's how long they need to grow. But that isn't the whole story. Some animals develop far more quickly. Others stay in the womb much longer than humans. Some mammals give birth after only a few weeks. If pregnancy were only about growing a baby, then every primate should have roughly the same gestation period, but they don't. And that's where the real story begins. When humans stood up, every story has a beginning, and the story of the 9-month pregnancy didn't begin in a hospital. It didn't begin with the first civilizations. In fact, it didn't even begin when humans first appeared. It began millions of years earlier, in a world completely unlike our own. There were no cities, no language, no fire, no written history, only vast forests and endless grasslands slowly spreading across the earth. The climate was beginning to change. The dense forests, where our ancestors had lived for millions of years, started to disappear. In many places, the trees gave way to wide open savannas. And that was when some ancient primates were forced to leave the safety of the trees and step onto the ground. It wasn't a choice. It was a fight for survival. Because on the ground, everything was more dangerous. Predators, a harsher climate, food was farther away than ever before. And then a small change began to appear. At first, no one could have imagined that it would reshape the entire future of humanity. A few individuals began spending more time standing upright. Instead of moving on all fours, they gradually relied on 2 legs as their primary way of getting around. They could see farther across the tall grass, carry food, carry their children, travel long distances, using less energy. Over time, that became an advantage, and advantages have a way of surviving generation after generation, hundreds of thousands of years, then 8 millions. Eventually, walking on 2 legs was no longer just a behavior. It became the defining trait of an entire evolutionary lineage. It was the first step toward becoming human. But from that very moment, a hidden cost began to emerge. No one noticed, because it didn't happen overnight. It happened little by little. Across countless generations, the body began to change. The spine, the legs, the feet, the muscles, and most importantly, the pelvis. No one could have known that this relatively small bone would one day hold the key to one of humanity's greatest mysteries. Why does a human mother carry her baby for almost exactly 9 months? And why has every human birth always been accompanied by pain and danger? But the strangest part was still yet to come. While the body was adapting to walking upright, another organ began evolving at an unprecedented pace, an organ that would turn the entire problem of childbirth into one of evolution's greatest challenges. That organ was the human brain. The secret of the human pelvis from the outside, walking on two legs, seems like nothing more than a different way to move, but deep inside the body, another transformation was quietly taking place. It involved the pelvis. Over millions of years, as our ancestors spent more and more time walking upright, their body weight was no longer distributed the way it once had been. Every step placed greater pressure on the hips to keep the body balanced and to make walking more energy efficient. The pelvis gradually changed shape. It became shorter, stronger, and far more efficient for life on two legs. It was an extraordinary advantage. Humans could travel farther, carry food, carry tools, carry their children, and perhaps most importantly, their hands were finally free to shape the first tools that would eventually change history. At first glance, everything seemed perfect, but evolution always comes with a price. Every advantage demands a trade-off, because the pelvis doesn't just support the body's weight, it also serves as the only passage through which every new human life must enter the world. And over time, that passage became narrower, not so narrow that childbirth was impossible, but no longer as wide as it had been in our earlier primate ancestors. For hundreds of thousands of years, that change didn't create a major problem because human babies still had relatively small brains. But then, something unexpected began to happen just as the pelvis was approaching its evolutionary limit. Another part of the body started changing faster than ever before: the brain. From that moment on, two evolutionary forces began colliding head-on. One favored a body better suited for walking. The other favored a larger brain capable of greater intelligence, and neither could fully win. This was the first great plot twist in the story of humanity, the very adaptation that helped humans become the dominant species on Earth also turned childbirth into one of the most dangerous biological events in the animal kingdom. And strangely, that was only the beginning, because as the human brain continued to expand at an unprecedented rate, our species became trapped in an evolutionary dilemma with no perfect solution. When the human brain began to grow at an unprecedented rate, but that was only half the story. While the human body was slowly adapting to life on two legs, another organ began to change faster than ever before: the brain. Over millions of years, the brains of our ancestors continued to grow. They remembered more, built better tools, worked together, hunted more efficiently, and with each generation, they became just a little smarter. At first, it seemed like the perfect advantage, but evolution never gives without taking something in return, because as the brain grew larger, so did the baby's head. Eventually, the mother's body found itself trapped in an impossible situation. The pelvis had evolved to become narrower, making walking more efficient. At the very same time, the baby's skull was becoming larger to house an increasingly powerful brain. Two evolutionary trends were unfolding at once, but they were moving in completely opposite directions. One favored a smaller birth canal. The other produced babies with larger heads. And eventually, our species ran into what scientists today often call the obstetric dilemma. It was an evolutionary problem with no perfect solution. If the baby remained in the womb for much longer, its brain would grow larger, but so would its head, until eventually it might no longer fit through the birth canal, putting both mother and child at serious risk. On the other hand, if birth happened too early, the brain would still be too underdeveloped. In the harsh world of prehistoric life, such infants would have had little chance of survival. Evolution had to choose not the perfect solution, but simply the least disastrous one. And that is why human newborns are far more helpless than almost any other mammal. Within hours of birth, a foal can stand and run. A young deer can quickly follow the herd, but a human baby can't even hold up its own head. It can't find food. It can't defend itself. And it takes years before it can survive on its own. At first glance, that seems like a weakness, but in reality, that very unfinished beginning created an extraordinary opportunity, because after birth, the human brain continues to grow at an astonishing pace. It learns language, it learns emotions, it learns memory, it learns culture, and over time, it becomes the most powerful thinking machine ever produced by evolution, which means that a pregnancy lasting about 9 months is not an arbitrary number. It is the narrowest possible boundary between life and death, just a little shorter, and countless babies would never have survived just a little longer, and countless mothers might never have survived childbirth. A difference of only a few weeks could have changed the entire course of human history. But then, an even stranger question begins to emerge. If 9 months is such a finely balanced biological compromise, why did so many ancient civilizations try to explain it through gods, curses, spirits, and mysterious rituals? Why not 12 months? If 9 months isn't enough, then why doesn't the human body keep the baby inside for 10 months or even 12? At first, it sounds like the perfect solution. The baby would be stronger, its brain would be more developed, its chances of survival would seem much higher. But the reality is exactly the opposite. With every passing week, the baby remains inside the womb. Its skull continues to grow. Its head becomes larger and larger. Meanwhile, the mother's birth canal cannot expand forever. Eventually, those two realities can no longer fit together. If pregnancy lasted too long, the baby's head might simply be too large to pass safely through the pelvis. At that point, childbirth would become an evolutionary dead end for most of human history, long before modern surgery or cesarean sections that often meant only one thing: death, not only for the baby, but for the mother as well. So evolution didn't select the most fully developed baby. It selected the latest possible moment when both mother and child still had a reasonable chance of surviving. It wasn't a perfect design. It was a fragile compromise, a compromise balanced on the edge between life and death. And that delicate balance has shaped the fate of billions of people throughout human history. Why not give birth after 6 months? If carrying a baby for too long is so dangerous, then why didn't evolution choose the opposite? Why not give birth earlier, after 6 months or 7? At first, it sounds like a safer solution. The mother would suffer less. Childbirth would be easier. But in reality, that choice would have been even more dangerous. At that stage, the baby's brain is still undergoing its most rapid period of development. Billions of neural connections have yet to be formed. The lungs are not yet mature enough to breathe reliably on their own. In the prehistoric world, there were no incubators, no ventilators, no modern medicine, no neonatal intensive care. A baby born too early had almost no chance of surviving. Evolution could not ignore that reality. It couldn't keep the baby inside the womb for too long, but it also couldn't bring the baby into the world too soon. And so, a pregnancy of about 9 months became the most delicate balance evolution could achieve, long enough to give the baby a real chance to survive, yet early enough to give the mother a fighting chance to survive childbirth. It wasn't a magical number. It was a biological boundary, a fragile compromise written over millions of years of evolution. What did ancient people believe thousands of years ago, long before modern science existed? No one knew. how the brain developed. No one understood why a baby needed to remain inside the womb for almost 9 months. So, every civilization searched for its own explanation. In ancient Egypt, pregnant women prayed to the goddesses of fertility, asking for a safe pregnancy and a healthy child. In Mesopotamia, small clay amulets were placed inside homes to drive away evil spirits believed to cause miscarriages or harm unborn children. The ancient Greeks saw childbirth as a fragile boundary between life and death. Prayers, rituals, and offerings accompanied nearly every pregnancy. In ancient China, people believed that a mother's thoughts and emotions could shape the child growing inside her. So, special customs and rituals were practiced to bring peace and harmony throughout pregnancy. For the Maya, childbirth was never just a family event. It was a sacred ceremony closely connected to the gods and the eternal cycle of life. Today, archaeologists have uncovered fertility figurines, protective amulets, ritual offerings, and ancient inscriptions, showing that these beliefs were very real, but modern science doesn't see them as explanations for pregnancy. Instead, they reveal something just as fascinating. They show how ancient people struggled to understand one of life's greatest mysteries long before they had biology to explain it. And perhaps the most remarkable part is this: although every civilization told a different story, they all agreed on one thing: the birth of a human being was far too extraordinary to be explained as mere chance. But the biggest twist isn't that human pregnancy lasts about 9 months. The biggest twist is that even 9 months isn't enough. Compared with most other mammals, human babies are born remarkably helpless. They can't walk, they can't feed themselves, they can't cling securely to their mothers, they can't even hold up their own heads. A newborn foal can stand within a short time. After birth, a young deer can quickly follow the herd, but a human baby needs months just to begin controlling its own body. That tells us something extraordinary. Humans are not born fully finished. We are born still under construction. A newborn's brain is like a building whose foundations have been laid, but whose greatest work is still ahead. After leaving the womb, it continues to grow. It continues to build billions of neural connections. It learns faces, voices, emotions, language, and the world around it. That's why some scientists to use the term the fourth trimester, not because the baby is still pregnant in a biological sense, but because its dependence on its caregivers remains almost absolute. In other words, human pregnancy ends inside the mother's womb, but human development continues outside it. And that may be the greatest compromise evolution ever made. Humans give birth earlier so that mothers can survive, but in exchange, their children must be cared for, protected, fed, and taught for an extraordinarily long time. Yet that apparent weakness became our greatest strength, because an unfinished brain is also a brain with an unmatched ability to learn, to adapt, to imitate, to remember, to absorb knowledge, culture, and experience. Perhaps we were never meant to be born too strong. Perhaps we were born to learn how to become human. The story of our entire species. Perhaps this was never just a story about pregnancy. Perhaps it has always been the story of humanity itself. If human pregnancy hadn't lasted about 9 months, the human brain might never have developed to the extraordinary level it has today. Without that brain, there would be no language. Without language, there would be no knowledge passed from one generation to the next. Without shared knowledge, there would be no agriculture, no cities, no civilizations, no pyramids, no ships crossing vast oceans, No telescopes revealing the universe, no spacecraft leaving our planet. Perhaps every achievement our species has ever made can be traced back to one brief period when a tiny human life was growing inside its mother's womb, and that may be why the 9-month pregnancy is one of the most remarkable balance ever shaped by evolution. Perhaps the greatest miracle was never the human brain itself, but the fragile balance between a mother's survival and her child's future. A balance so precise that changing it by only a few weeks might have altered the entire course of human history. And perhaps the greatest secret of our species was never hidden inside towering pyramids or lost civilizations. Perhaps it has always been hidden in the simplest of places, in the moment when a tiny heart beats for the very first time and a new human being quietly begins the journey that may one day change the world.